Alright, here's the window I'm working on. Right now it just has some plastic in the window to keep the weather out. Let's get the sunlight there. Let's go upstairs and see what we're working with on the inside. Alright, there's not much light up here except what's coming through the walls, but here's what we've got to work with. Yeah, this whole upstairs, this is kind of where I store my wood. That is the access down to the shop below, but I would like to convert this to something a little more usable. Right now it's been taken over by the local fauna. Oh, let's see if I can measure this out again without taking the plastic down. That would be good. 17¼ is about the narrowest. Top to bottom, 24½. 17¼ by 24½. I guess a square and a level are a little overkill, but at least then I'll know what I'm working with. That is not bad. That's not too bad. When I was working with these windows, putting them in, I had the window sashes themselves, but I didn't have the window casings. So I had worked from the inside out. So I had the dimensions of the window sash, and I measured out from there to get the casings, and then out from there to figure out where to put the vertical pieces to frame in the window. And I cut the sides for the casing, and then I nailed those or screwed those to the 2x, and then measured it didn't work out. So this time I'm working from the outside in. I don't have a window sash, that's what I'm making. So I will start with the casing on the outside. I will build that, square and true to the size that I want it. The dimensions of the window frame itself will be taken from the inside of the dimensions of the casing, and then I'll just cut the glass to fit inside that frame. So that should be a lot easier to be able to control the whole thing from start to finish. Okay, here's the casing pieces that I put together. They're not connected yet. It's just kind of the size that it's going to look like. But what I do want to do with this, because I want the sill to be slanted down to let water roll out of it, I want to cut these side pieces with a 5° angle on the bottom to give that sill a little bit of a slope. Why 5 degrees? I don't know, because 10 degrees looks like too much. So that's what I'll do next. Okay, here's a stupidly simple trick that I've never done before because I've never had a need to. But you just take your rafter square, you find what I want is for the sill is going to be down here and it's going to be sloped that direction. So I need an angle, something like this. But what I want to find is 5 degrees. So these things are pretty handy. You put it on the pivot point. See, it even says pivot right there. Right at the long end that you don't want to cut away. Over on this edge are the different angles. So you just rotate this on the pivot point until 5 is on the edge of your board, and the resultant angle that you get over here is the 5 degrees. So now I just mark that out, and I know I've got 5 degrees of waste right there I can cut off, and the board that goes on the bottom is going to end up at a 5-degree angle. You didn't really think I was going to send that through without the guard on it, did you? I got the casing built. You can see it's got the 5-degree slant on the bottom on the sill. I've got like a 1-inch overhang that will go out beyond the siding and hopefully drip the water down off of it that way. For any water that hits the glass and runs out will run off that way. It's relatively square. And I'm probably going to mount this so that this outside edge is flush with the outside of the siding boards. I don't know if I'll caulk around it. It depends how bad it really is, how bad it really fits the hole. I mean, it's a barn. There's gaps this wide between all the boards anyway, but at least as far as this gaping hole, water shouldn't be getting in that way. Now I just have to measure the inside of the casing for the window frame that I need to make in order to get this thing sealed up. I got my wood that I'm going to use for the frame. It's just construction 2x3 lumber I picked up at the local lumber store. Home center, not a lumber store. And I planed it down a little bit to give it slightly, more regular dimensions, and it had some rough edges, so I took it down a little bit to try to give me cleaner edges to work with. But it's a window frame, it's a barn. So I've got my wood. Now the way I'm going to join these, I'm going to try to use standard window frame joinery. And by that, it's going to look something like this. I cut each piece to be the full dimension so that my joints can overlap. And the way I do that, the rails are going to get a tenon, and the stiles are going to get, I'm not exactly sure what you'd call it, through mortise or something. It's kind of a double half lap lock. I don't know what it's called. So just to illustrate, the stiles are going to have the center slot cut out of them. The rails are going to have the opposite. They're going to have the tenon in the center, and the side pieces, what's that called, the cheeks or whatever, are going to be cut away, leaving the notch for these parts of the stile to slide into. Does that make sense? So now I just have to set up the table saw to do this, and this is why I built my tenoning jig. I'll set that up and show it to you. So because I'm going to be cutting these pieces on their ends, rather than try to stand it up against the short little fence and guide it through the saw, when the saw is going to be, exposed, the blade's going to be exposed about that far. You build this instead. It has a much taller fence to it. You can take clamps and clamp it down. You can run it through the blade, the wood gets cut, and your fingers don't. And that will work for both the tenon cuts. Where are you? That'll work for the tenon cuts. Basically what you're doing is setting the blade to cut this much. So now I've got the one side of that tenon cut all the way up to the line. I think my blade might have been a little bit dull for that, but it got through there. Now what I can do, after I go through and make all the rest of those cuts, I should just be able to flip the board over, run it through and get the other side. Whatever's left over is going to be the size of my tenon that I can size for the stiles. I've got all the tenons cut on the two rails. Now I just need to cut them away. Let me set that up. So there's my tenon. The center here will fit into the slot that I make here. Glue those two together and it should be a very solid joint. I got the joints all cut for the window frame. They are a very snug fit. They're supposed to be a press fit. This was more of a force fit. They aren't quite right. These mortises need to be a little bit deeper. These tenons are still kind of sitting proud up here a little bit, so I need to take care of that. Other than that, I think it looks pretty good. I will come back later to take care of this because I'm tired. After this, really all I have to do, I'm going to glue this together once the joints are correct, and I'm going to route the ledge around the inside edge that the glass will sit into. And the other side, if I'm feeling tricky, I might try to put some kind of decorative edge along what should be the inside. So we'll see how I feel about that. I also have to get it to fit inside the casing that has the 5-degree slope sill. So I'll probably run this thing through the table saw at a 5-degree tilt and try to get this bottom to match the bottom of the casing, and then there won't be much more to do but to install it. We'll take care of this tomorrow. Good morning. Good afternoon. I spent the earlier part of the day taking this window frame back apart and cleaning up the cheeks of these tenons and deepening the mortises a little bit to make them fit better. And I think I've achieved it. It's more of a press fit today than a force fit that it was yesterday. As you can see, these tenons look a whole lot better as a fit than they did yesterday. I put a tape measure across it and it's actually a square rectangle, a proper rectangle. These gaps here aren't great, but they're not bad, and I think we'll take it. I'm going to knock it back apart, put some glue on these joints, clamp it up, and let it cure, and then I can proceed to the next step. that glue is drying, that brings me to the next step. Once I get done taking that frame out of clamps, what I'm going to need to do is route around the inside, which brings me to another tool that needs resurrecting. This is a router that I have. In fact, I don't even remember where I got it. But when I was moving my stuff, I found this, so it's time to put it back in service. This is an old Craftsman router, and it looks like it needs some help. There's one of my bits, so I must have used it. This is just a, consumer model fixed base router. Alright, yeah, I really don't remember using it. So, let me get this thing cleaned up as much as I can, put it back into service. I think I get stuck that fast. This is about one of the worst, one of the kludgiest contraptions I've ever seen. Let me see if I can explain what I'm seeing here. If you have one of these, you know. If you've never seen one, you and I are pretty close to kin. It has this ring. And the purpose of the ring and the screw threads built into the body is to adjust the height of the base. Now you rotate this ring and it adjusts, but it is so, I don't know how in the world you're supposed to get an actual fine measurement out of this thing. Now these two rings that keep getting in my way, the best I can figure is that they are some kind of stops. When you route something, these 1/4 inch collet routers, especially the home units like this one, it's not very strong. It's 1.5 horsepower. So it's not going to have the gusto to go through like a 1/2 inch deep rabbet or mortise or something all at once. So what you would do is set the depth of the bit for half of that and then make another pass with it at full depth so that you can get all the wood and not break your bit or ruin your router. And I believe what these stops are for, you set your full depth for the cut and you set a stop there. And then you bring the thing back to half of the depth of the cut and you set a stop there. So after you're done the first pass of half the depth of the bit, you have a quick reference. You just rotate the thing down to the other stop. You know that it's down to the setting that you want for the second pass, the final pass. You make that pass and all the setup is on the front end rather than when you're doing your work. But this is just a lousy system. I've thrown some silicone in here to try to make the action a little bit smoother, but it's still not great. What keeps falling out? And in addition, I can't get this bit out at all. This collet will not open up. I've got it soaking with some WD-40, but I don't even know, again, mea culpa. I haven't worked with this thing for so long that I'm not even sure which way this thing turns to get it out. So I'm either tightening it more or it's just really, really not coming out. I've tried both ways just to try to get some movement on it, and so far nothing. I'll keep working. Okay, update. I got the collet loose, but now the bit is stuck and it won't come out, so it is lodged inside the shaft. Oh, let's see what I can do here. There we go. All right. That explains the missing bit in my set. If you ask woodworkers what it is that takes the most time, some people might say, oh, it's, you know, the coming up with something to build, or designing something that's worthy of, you know, the cost of lumber. I haven't gotten that far yet. The biggest problem I have is figuring out how to do the steps that I need to do using only the tools that I have. I know right now what I need to do is put the rabbet in the edge of these boards in order to set the glass down inside there. And I just took the time to fix up my router and put it back together, and it seems to be working okay. But now I'm trying to figure out how to make this cut, because all I have really is a straight cutting bit. I don't have a pattern cutting bit. I know some people would say, oh, just build a pattern and use your pattern cutting bit and go around, and yeah, I don't have that. So what I'm considering doing, I put together this frame. I had to take some 2x4s and plane them down to the same height as my frame. And I'm going to use that as a surface to run my router along. And although the frame itself is wide enough to balance the router and get it to cut, if I just push it in there, it's just going to keep going. I'm going to need some kind of a fence up here to stop the base of the router when I get to the 3/8 depth that I need to get the cut that I need. And then at some point up there, it's going to have to stop, or it's going to run the whole way out the frame. So I guess I'm building a frame to make a frame. Is that common? Does everybody do that? Oh, and speaking of tools that I have, I got my router all back together. Looks okay, but when I was working on it, you might have even heard me say, what hit the floor? Well, here's what hit the floor. A couple of ball bearings. The problem is, I don't know where they go. I didn't have the motor parts or anything besides the nut on the collet there, so it has to be something inside this depth mechanism. But if that's the case, maybe that's the difference between it working so lousy and maybe it'll actually work well. But I took it apart. I can't figure out where those ball bearings go, so hope it doesn't fly apart on me. Let's try that again after I screwed that up. For some reason, my measurements were off and these fences were an 1/8 inch, 1/16 too far, or an 1/8 too far. And I gouged into there. Let's keep going. It's not as pretty as I hoped it would be. I don't know how that happened. You set it for 3/8 depth. How does it go farther? This one's got notches. This one turned out okay. So I can just take this frame, flip it around, and do this side next. Understand. How is it gouging? Unless it's tearing out. So it's not pretty. Really not pretty. And I don't know why it's done what it's done. I ran the base plate all the way up to my stops, which were measured properly. Why did this do this? Did the fibers just tear out chunks? Is it my bit is horribly dull? Because it probably is. It's ugly. Well, fortunately it's going in a barn. Okay, yesterday you saw me botch up the cut on that frame, and I went back and did a little research, and I found a manual to the router, and pulled that down from online, and it recommends only taking a cut as deep as 1/8 of an inch, and I didn't do that. I had this thing full depth at 3/8. I figured it would handle 3/8 of an inch cut in softwood, and it didn't. So that was my fault. I should have taken the more shallow cut and made several passes on it and sneak up on the depth that I wanted. And I didn't do that, and I paid the price. So we get to try again today, because what I want to do is go to this side and put in a decorative pass. This is going to be the side that you see from inside the living area. Not that you live in a barn, but I want to try my hand at putting a decorative edge on here. Now, I found some router bits that I had bought for a different job, and never did use them, but I still have them around, so I've got a nice decorative bit. It even has the little following bearing on there to ride along this edge. I won't have to build the frame around it like I did for the other side. Now, what you also saw when I was taking this apart to figure out why it wasn't working, you might have seen in the one clip one of the ball bearings fall out of the inside. And I wondered where that went. I found two of them on the floor here. Those do, in fact, according to the manual that I pulled down and looked through, I looked at the exploded diagram, the parts diagram, and those ball bearings do, in fact, ride inside this red adjusting collar. There are several of them around the outside perimeter of this bottom ledge. They ride against the router base. Now, I took it apart today. I put those two bearings back in. There were still two in place, and there are still two missing. So I just put it back together with 4 out of the 6. It works about as well as they expected it to, I guess. The way the thing works is you have the adjusting collar, you have the stop rings that I mentioned the other day, and the way you adjust it, you unlock it with this piece. You then change the adjustment with that red ring, and it's got little marks along the edge of this. Supposedly, you can index this. Each of these marks is supposed to be 32nd of an inch, I believe, measured against this line here. So wherever that is, if you've got it set somewhere, you need to change it just a few 30 seconds. You're supposed to be able to do it that way. They don't have any positive stops on them or anything, so it's just kind of hit and miss. It's not a great system, but it works a little better than it did the other day since I took it apart and kind of lubricated it, put those bearings back in place. Now, yesterday you saw me finish up the corners because, you know, the router is going to leave a rounded edge in the corners. You saw me finishing up the corners with a chisel. With a more decorative edge, I'm going to be using this Roman OG profile. In the corners there, if I go to square that up, it's going to be a little more of an art project because you're trying to, you know, finish up curves into the corner. So we'll see how well I can pull that off. All right, I've got the frame kind of locked down here. I've got clamps to keep it from moving while I route around the edge. I've got the stops set. So at the first stop, this bit is going to be only halfway protruding out. The bearing will ride against the inside surface and it's going to cut half the distance. And then when I get done with that, I will move the adjustment ring to the other stop, and that should be full depth of the bit. And then I'll run around a second time and hopefully have the proper profile. Well, that felt much, much better than it did yesterday, so let me adjust that the rest of the way and do the second pass. All right, let me bring you in and take a look at that. You can see where it struggled when it went through, like what I guess is this knot here. The wood was a little different, but I think it did a pretty good job. A little piece here where I was a little wiggly, I might go back over that. Now I just need to cut in somehow, try to make these corners, or I can leave it the way it is. Let me think on that. I decided I was never going to be able to carve this square in the corner, so I decided to do a hybrid thing and cut this first edge square, and then, you know, cut it square down to the first curve, and then let the curve be curved in the corner and square on the edge. That's what it's going to be. By the time I, hit it with a little bit of sandpaper and throw some paint on it, maybe you won't be able to tell. All right, now that I've got the profile of the window on both sides, looking all right. Now I've got to fit this inside of the casing, and it doesn't fit. I knew it wouldn't fit. I made it just slightly oversized, and I'm going to cut it down on the table saw to fit precisely. And it also has to fit this 5-degree slope on the sill. I'm going to cut that 5-degree slope on the bottom of the frame using the table saw. All right, I've got the blade canted over 5 degrees. I'll just run my fence back as far as I need to get this guy lined up, and then I'll just take that 5 degrees off of the end of the board. There's my 5 degrees. I'm going to try to take a 1/16 off of either side because that's really all the farther I need to go. Fits just inside the window. If I sand it down a little more on the bottom, I might be able to get it inside a little bit, but I have to decide how far I want it to go in. So that's what it should look like. I'll need to get some glass to put in there. I'm going to paint it all and it'll look nice. Next I have to go up to the upstairs there and size this, make sure it's going to go in, and clear everything out, make sure I can fit this in the hole. A little bit snug right there. I think I can take care of that. Go. Norman wanted to say hi too. He's a good farm helper. Sure does like his pets too. All right, Normie, I'm gonna get back to work. All right, I practiced on this frame over here, down there. That's the one out of the window above the workbench. I put the glass in there and put the glazing and the points in there and got the glass held in. It's curing now. So now that I've practiced on a couple, I will do it here. Now, if you saw the video where I put these windows together, I've done this before, but I was using the tube of glazing and I didn't like that stuff, and I said so. It was really runny and it was hard to work into the corners. This stuff is a lot more fun, frankly. It's a lot more, it's like Play-Doh. So you work that into the corners, set the glass in it, and then put in your, work the bead around there. So let's do that. Let me show you that piece. Now, having done just a few windows, I am not claiming to be any kind of an expert, but I think it'll hold up. I think it'll work. The only thing I'm really concerned about are these little glazing points. I did one of those other windows, putting the glass pane back in and pushing that glazing point in there. I cracked the glass, so let's hope that doesn't happen this time. Let's get to it. I'm glad I got the tub this time. I knew I had more than one pane to do, and that tube really lasted for about one window, one sash. So this is more than double the amount for only a couple dollars more than the tube. So I was happy to get that, and it works so much more easily. Now I'm just slamming it in here. I know you could probably be more frugal with it, but anything that is excess, you're just going to scrape off anyway. And this window frame is pretty clean since I put this coat of primer on it. So anything I pull out, I can just put back in the jar and use it later. The other window sash was a lot more contaminated. The wood was really dirty. I sanded it down, but it wasn't super clean by the time I put this stuff in it. So the stuff that I scraped out of that is actually over there in that lid. I didn't want to put it back in the jug being as contaminated as it was. Like I say, this is a bit much because I'm going kind of fast. If it weren't such a very, 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 very hot day, you can work this stuff in your hands to warm it up and make it a little more pliable. But as it is, this is fine. I work it a little bit, knead it a little bit just to give it a little more consistency. Now this looks sloppy, but it doesn't matter. I had this glass cut, but I cut it right to the very measurement. Probably could have left an extra 1/16 on the sides, but I'm just pressing this in. I don't want to crack the glass, so I'm doing it only where it's supported on the edges. Now, I've seen a trick on the internet. Somebody took a rag and a vibrating sander and just ran it on the edge, and it just pushed the glass right down into the putty just from the vibration of the sander, and it did not break the glass. I thought that was cool, but I'm not brave enough to try it. All right, so with this sitting in there, it's sitting on a bead of this stuff on the back side. So now I'm just going to run my points in, and then I'm going to glaze this front side. All right, that's good. The glazing points went in really well on that other window sash because the wood is so old and
kind of weak. I was concerned about this being new wood, but it is just construction pine. So I found if I just work it back and forth like this and wiggle it in, it'll go in flush. If you try to push it all at once, sometimes it won't go in all the way. And then you've got that thing in your way when you're trying to work the putty. I'm just putting in one. These in there, the glass isn't going to hold on, isn't going to fall out. I know because when I tried to take the glass out, if there's even one of those little tiny points left in there, that glass isn't coming out. So small window, 1 point per side, I think we'll be fine. All right, so now putty. From what I saw, you just take the heel of your hand and you jam it into the corner. You're just trying to get material in there at this point. On the other one, I put the putty in and then I worked it on one edge and then around to the next, but I ended up just putting my hand in it as I was moving the frame around, so that didn't work out so hot. This time I'm just going to put all the putty in at once and then work it. I still don't guarantee that I'm not going to stick my hand in it at some point. All right. Almost looks like an art project at this point. All right, now you take your scraper. This is not a proper glazing scraper. This is a paint scraper, but they're similar, but not the same from what I hear. I think a glazing knife is actually stiffer and smoother or something, but this one works okay. So what you want to do is put the blade down at an angle, and you should only be touching the glass at about where that ledge is underneath. Now I've got a pretty wide ledge, so I probably don't have enough putty, but we'll give it a shot. Yeah, this is supposed to be lower. At a nice angle like this, the blade smooths it off as you pull back. And the right side of the blade is actually contacting the glass and cutting off the waste. When you get to the end, you just pull it back out like that. And then scrape off the excess, trying not to get that nice edge you just made. That stuff's clean, so I might end up using that again. Now on to the next. You come back later and work this a little more. Right now you're just getting it in. Very soft at this point, so it's very easy to mess it up. The backside still has all that squeeze out. So this you don't need to keep or shape, you just pull it out. All right, The glass is horribly filthy, but I'll clean that up. And that looks like a window pane. I've primed it, but I'll probably, well, not probably, I will paint this with another coat before it goes into the hole that it will occupy. There's probably not much light up here for this, but here's the window installed. I simply put some 2x4s around the edge, screwed them into the siding boards, and then put screws directly through the casing into those 2x4s. And that should be sufficient. I was even so bold as to put a level on the thing. Turned out okay. So there's the window. I'll get you a picture from the outside. And there's the window, and the camera's trying to shut down the exposure. But there's the window, the way it looks installed. I have not yet painted it because the glazing compound was still very soft. So I think it'll be okay there. I'm going to let it cure for a little while longer, and then I'll go back with the final top coat of paint and paint it all the way around.